Yeah, I guess we can move on.
Okay. Okay, good morning, good evening, and good afternoon to the world. Welcome to the International Symposium Foresight and Science, Technology, and Innovation Policy. We are in our session 3, which will explore and discuss, the topic blended futures pushing the boundaries of foresight. And again, I would like to thank the organizers for inviting me and giving me the opportunity, to collaborate and have a conversation with you this afternoon and lead, the session. We've got 4 amazing futurists who will be sharing with us today, their perspectives and views about, the futures and of foresight. And of course, when I received the invitation from Ozdchan and when I saw the poster that was placed in here, it reminds me about a quote from Homer when he said that excellence is our fatal flaw. And when excellence becomes our fatal flaw, it exposes, it gives us, some sort of a question about what might be the limits and scopes of my practice. What are the limits and gaps in current foresight research and practices? Can foresight go beyond traditional tools and methods? How might a blended futures knowledge approaches and tools and practices look like? And how might we push the boundaries of foresight, given the emergence of so many drivers of change and the connectivity that we found ourselves in a pandemic situation? And these are the types of questions, I believe, that our 4 amazing, I would say, super futurists who will share their perspectives in different ways and ways by which foresight could emerge. So in this session, the expectation is that we will learn from their experiences and how other disciplines integrate new approaches in futures methodology and practices. And hopefully we gain new insights on how to design better foresight methodologies and approaches for better futures. So I would like to quickly introduce our speakers for this afternoon. So, of course, let me introduce myself first quickly. I am Sherman Cruz. I'm the man from Manila, from the Philippines, and currently the executive director of the Center for Engaged Foresight. It's a foresight research institute and think tank that operates globally but based in Manila. And I'm currently the chair of the Association of Professional Futurists. So I would like to introduce first Рафаэль Уэддингтон. Рафаэль is the founder of the LIID or LIID Future Lab. It is a future research platform at the crossroad of business, urban design, academia, digital humanities, and the arts. Since 2000, LIID has designed future labs mixing creative methods and inspirational material with in-depth theoretical and strategic research for companies, cities, universities, and cultural institutions in France and many countries. Our second speaker is Karolina Sobczak. So Karolina is a knowledge manager at ABIS, or the Academy of Business in Society, where she is responsible for identifying the most relevant sustainability themes and developing related projects, events, and trainings. Karolina is passionate about leadership development. She's currently exploring holistic approaches to change, including coaching and awareness-based systems change. And our third speaker is Ozdchan Saritas. Professor Ozdchan Saritas is head of laboratory for science and technology studies at the National Research University Higher School of Economics in Moscow, and an honorary professor at the Manchester Institute of Innovation Research, the University of Manchester. Ozdchan is also the editor-in-chief of Foresight, the Journal of Future Studies, Strategic Thinking, and Policy. His research focuses on innovation and policy research, with particular emphasis on socioeconomic and technological foresight. And of course, last but not the least, my good friend Jan Paul Pinto is a commercial engineer with 17 years of professional and teaching experience in marketing, planning, and prospective strategic management processes. Professor of a postgraduate and undergraduate universities in Ecuador and Colombia. He holds a master's degree in marketing from Capitole One University in Toulouse, France, a master's degree in gestion sciences from CINAM in Paris, France, and a master's degree in security and defense from the Institute of Higher National Studies of Ecuador. He is currently a PhD candidate at the University of the Valle, Cali, Colombia, where he is developing a prospective process for the imagination and materialization of the future. So we have four amazing futurists and experts of their respective field. And without further ado, I would like to call on Рафаэль Уэддингтон to start the presentation. Рафаэль?
My microphone. Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, loud and clear.
Okay, super great. Thank you for this great introduction, and thank you for this invitation. It's a pleasure to continue our blended futures conversation, as we had a first session during the UNESCO summit in December, and I think there is a lot to discuss about this border of foresight and other disciplines. So let me share my screen. This one. Okay, can you see it well?
Mm-hmm.
Let me go on up, full screen. Okay, can you see it well?
Yes.
Yes, super. I'm going to share today. I'm going to share with you some research experiment I made at the crossroads of art, foresight, design, and urban design, under the label of Designing Future Labs, which is like the statement I have as a foresight professional now. Just to come back on the first blended future session that we had in December, I took at that time a more theoretical position, showing all the bridges between art and foresight, and just also to reinstall a little bit this theoretical frame. I was saying that art allows to travel in time, in the past and in the future. Art is a time tracker and time traveler. Saying also that art can be seen as weak signal productions with subjective projection being shared. And in this case, I'm going to show also how one of my artwork has been the base of an urban research lab. Third aspect was to say that art is also an ecosystem of cultural influence, where trends are being shaped with the model of soft power. Also seeing art as a space to prototype futures, and in this case, when art becomes a way of prototyping, it can dialogue with design, critical design, and urban design. And also saying that art can be a speculative science, and a way of addressing the future as a critical space for with a freedom of speculation. And so the project I'm going to share with you now are touching a little bit on each of those 5 aspects of how art can contribute to foresight. And I will share more specifically different experiments I made around in a project about the future of the Greater Paris. Paris becoming the Greater Paris. I know that Moscow is also in the process of becoming the Greater Moscow. So it's one of the challenges of cities nowadays to change of scale. And the project I'm going to share with you are more all addressing that future challenge of the Greater Paris. You already mentioned my practice in the introduction. Just to say a few words, LIID Future Lab, it's a research platform I created 20 years ago. It started as an art project because I had a background in finance originally, and I worked on trading floor in the 90s, but then I had an art practice, and LIID Future Lab started as an art-based research platform, and it became a foresight research platform today. So now we're producing foresight content, we design collaborative methods, and we use a great diversity of formats. I'm not going to say more about the LIID because it's not the point today. I really want to focus on more the experiment I made in the last 10 years on the Greater Paris, which they come from art-based research, but they do contribute to what could be new forms of foresight practices, and that's why I'm sharing them with you today. So this is more an overview of the LIID Future Lab today. This is an overview of the people we work with with companies, cities, universities, and cultural places. And this is it for the LIID Future Lab. So now let's go on the Greater Paris. So Paris becoming the Greater Paris. Paris has a giant suburb, and it's really a tricky challenge to change of scale, because it's 10 million inhabitants with the suburb, and it's only 2.5 inside Paris. And it's even difficult to know what is the perimeter of the Greater Paris. And for this case, I initiated an art-based research project in 2008, with not a specific approach, because at that time I was not so close to foresight, and I decided to use that image you see with the disco ball, the artwork in the top of the screen. That was an installation I made in 2001 as an image of the digital transition and what we would call today the data deluge. But because the images I used in this installation were photographs of cities, it felt that it could be also a way of seeing the city as a datascape or as a cosmos of information. And for some reason, it gave me this idea that maybe the giant metropolises could be seen as a kind of urban galaxy with a visible and an invisible part. And so the whole project I developed about the Greater Paris started with that poetic metaphor of seeing the city as a galaxy and a constellation of information, of places, of networks. And so so this is an example of how an artwork can be also a way of thinking the future. So this is the base of the project. From there, I designed this conceptual model with that map that you see, which was the way, so the diagram is inspired by the way astrophysicians are modelizing the cosmos to try to understand how the cosmos is functioning. And this layering system, it felt it was quite relevant to understand the different rhythm of transformation of the city. And so I designed this kind of a canvas to organize a critical thinking of the future of the Greater Paris with 4 different layers. And from that intuition, very creative intuition, and this translation from astrophysics to urban design, this canvas ended up being extremely useful to engage in a collaborative research project later on. So this diagram, I've shown it as an artwork. I have used it as a pedagogical tool. It's also a future conceptual canvas, and it has become also a way of organizing a strategy. So this is an example of how through an art project you can really invent also foresight strategies that are not inherited from the foresight discipline, comes from art, but at some point provide some new entries, new possible entries. So I'm not going necessarily to go full in depth in the because it would be like I could spend an hour on each of the slides, but this is more to show how from an artwork and a creative reasoning, you can end up with a foresight conceptual model. That can be, so in this case, the fourth slide, it's also 4 rhythms of transformation. The background is the shape of the city that transforms very slowly. The second is a governance canvas, which transforms more rapidly, but still very slowly. You don't change the institutional infrastructure so often. The fourth layer is the program, the social uses that transform much faster at a rhythm that is much more dynamic, and also that are, moving on the territory, so they are less anchored. And the fourth layer is the immaterial dimension, which is something I always give a lot of importance in all the project I carry. And that fourth level, that fourth dimension, you have the digital layer, you have the knowledge, you have the history, you have the collective imaginaries, and that layer change much faster and is not necessarily very anchored on the territory. That's why it's more distant from the ground at the background. So with those 4 layers, you can also organize the knowledge you collect to design future scenarios, saying that urban designer would be on a certain layer, politician on the second, or innovation ecosystem would be on the third, art project might be on the fourth, or digital development on the fourth layers also. So all together with that conceptual diagram, and it's also with the looking back at all the workshop I did with students of different disciplines, it ended up being an extremely efficient pedagogical tool. So and so this I shared also that tool in academic context, such as at the Urban Lab at UCL. I wrote an article also in the Parsons Journal for Information Mapping, and this is kind of like a like also using visual maps to deal with complexity. So that's the first step of the project. Another one has been to do a lot of workshop with students in art, in design management, in art management. So I'm not going to go in detail. This is more conventional, or like an in-field exploration and drawing future narrative. So this is like, I have a whole bunch of experiment with students. I can also put a question on that. I'm just sharing that slide more quickly. So on this one also, it was also highlighting weak signals, local weak signals, so combining future research on urban change, and also the case of the Greater Paris, having using a case study to highlight future trends that can be relevant for other cities. So same thing, this ended up in a publication on the role of cultural and creative industries to support urban transformation. So this is more like weak signal and future narratives. Another step was, there is some image missing. Another step was also more design oriented, working with students to design future projects, some being more applied, such as like what could be collaborative platform to empower the creative communities of the Greater Paris to actually shape the Greater Paris in a bottom-up approach. Some were more how to design creative hubs as new landmark places of the future of the future Greater Paris. So same thing, those projects were done with students in different contexts, and some have been done with in partnership with local stakeholders, so that what could be like the utopia of young people can become inspirational material for urban designer and urban stakeholders. So it's also showing how via an art-based research project, you can inseminate and contribute to the future of to the making of the future of a metropolis, not via the top-down approach, but by bottom-up project. And I'm sharing this also to encourage our audience to collaborate more with artists and artistic research departments, showing, and this is to show that it's really via art project, you can really contribute to, the collective inspiration.
Raphael, time check, 1 minute.
1 minute, okay. So I'm going to finish with this giant workshops. So was it 20 minutes or 15 minutes? I think we said.
Your time ends at 14:05. So
Okay.
Time check, yeah.
Okay. So this is another giant workshop to design future perspective at a horizon of 150 years, using inspiration of images from the past and images of the present. So showing that, foresight, exploring the future of cities with art and design is also a possibility to use images as a resource, and designing futurescapes, exploring new formats of research. So this is also another collab. And the final project was writing this book, which is a design fiction book. So another creative format, foresight research format, of going through a narrative, a future narrative, sharing a possible future scenario, but with a critical approach, meaning that in each chapter, each chapter shares ideas, but critics discuss the idea, so that each time the idea is challenged, for the good and the worst. So and this book is being also reviewed by different people. So I'm sharing the good critics I had on this book. So okay, so I could share many more options, such as also photographic workshop in the public space, and I'm going to stop here, not to take too much time, but if the audience is interested, I can answer to more questions of other projects, art-based research projects, using artistic formats and artistic context to design innovative foresight projects. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Raphael. And Carolina, on to you.
Thank you so much. Just give me a thumbs up if you can hear me all right.
Yes, I can hear you. All right.
And can you see my presentation?
Yes.
Wonderful.
Yep.
So thank you from my side as well for this wonderful opportunity. I think my presentation is going to fit this session on blended futures and pushing the boundaries of foresight, because I'm not a foresight expert and I'm giving a presentation to you here today. So I'm very excited about this. And before we start, I also wanted to give a short overview on the organization I represent. I'm knowledge manager at ABIS, and we are a business academic network supporting sustainability by synergizing the knowledge and experiences of our corporate and academic members. So we are a membership organization, and we have throughout time dealt with various projects and sustainability themes. And now we are more and more going into circular and inclusive economy, mobilizing change agents in business and academia, and as well as those we call movers, so students, junior researchers, and young leaders. So we basically develop spaces and practices that equip business leaders with the knowledge, skills, and mindset that they need to become future-proof. So this leads me to the topic of this presentation, because in our work we really benefited from a tool that we came across when we worked in one of our research and innovation projects funded by the EU Commission. And that really helped us in bringing our mission and our vision forward. So this is just a brief overview of what I'm going to share with you today. So what the scenario exploration system is and its origins, the version at ABIS is using and how we are doing that, how it works and who played with us, and last but not least, the digital version that we've developed recently. So the scenario exploration system is a tool that has been developed by the European Commission Joint Research Center together with some researchers from the Hawaii Research Center for Future Studies. So it's a very robust research-based gaming methodology. Basically, it's a board game. And one of the things that I really, really love about it, and one of the reasons why I'm here with you today, is that it really helped democratizing foresight, and it's an interactive and approachable tool that made this field of study and way of thinking broadly available to anybody who wants to engage with it. And it provides a wonderful discussion platform for people to talk about different issues, and also from a perspective of what could happen in the future and how we can manage that. Also taking into account that we live in a world where different actors are operating. So it also really helps to take a long-term thinking perspective, understanding the complexity of the world that we live in and alternative futures, and also to embed collaboration in what we do. Many versions and spin-offs are available for free for anybody who wants to engage with this tool under the Creative Commons license, which basically means that in case you want to get access to it, you just need to inform the European Commission that you're developing a new version or using a current one. Now on to the ABIS version, which we call the Sustainable Lifestyle 2.0 version. You can see a nice picture of it on the screen. So this version was developed by a consortium of academic members in which ABIS was part of. And in 2016, we were about to finish this project, which focused on the role of end users in sustainability transitions. And what we realized is that we wanted to use the outcomes of this project for something that could be more easily available and mainstream than just research papers. So we went back and studied what was available, and we found another previous EU project called the Spread 2050, the Scenarios for Sustainable Lifestyles project. And we integrated the scenarios that were developed through this project into the results of the EU Innovate one. And we created this Sustainable 2.0 lifestyle version of the scenario exploration system. What you see on the screen are the 4 scenarios that we are using. I'm not going to go into them right now, but they have been, again, they are research-based, and they've been developed based on 2 dimensions. One is the global versus local orientation that the future might take. And on the x-axis, let's say, we have the type of governance, so whether it's top-down and bottom-up. So what happens during the scenario exploration game is that participants have the chance to experience one of these alternative futures. And if you just focus on the singular super champions or the empathetic communities, which are 2 opposite ones, the name itself already gives you a hint on how different these 2 scenarios can be. So when participants engaged in exploring the future under these very different conditions, this can lead them to reflect on what they are currently doing in their daily life and what kind of future they also want to co-create with others. So I share that this is a board game, and we have different participants that can take part to it. So this is the roles that they can take. So there are 5 explorers, which represent business, so established business and small entrepreneur, policymaking, and the third sector, so civil society organization, and the citizen innovator, which was the new entry from the EU Innovate project. Apart from this, we also have a sort of feedback system in the game, which is offered by the 2 public voices. So the citizen innovator and the post-truth public voice are the 2 new players in the game that our version introduced. And as also you can infer from the type of participants that can play, this can lead to very in-depth discussions about any kind of topic. So the way we have used it is mainly in academic setting. As I mentioned, we are a business academic network, and we use it with students. And this type of platform really can have a range of applications and uses. It's very versatile. We had an event 3 weeks ago in which we had examples of how this has been used in policymaking with the Finnish customs, for example, or in EU-China trade talks, or in companies like Uber to discuss the future of mobility. So this kind of game are maybe more focused on simulation type of activities. So they mean to prepare for the future. How we use it at ABIS is more of a role play. So of course we play with students, so they take on the roles of the game. And we aim to really raise awareness about sustainability, systemic thinking, complexity, and so on in students, and develop some skills, which I will mention in a second. And we even use it as an assessment center for junior enterprises, which are student-led companies, to appraise some competencies during their selection process of their new hires. So this is the part that I'm most excited about. I've been leading this kind of workshop for a couple of years now. And what you can see now is the kind of conditions that are created during this board game and what students can learn in terms of competencies. So I loved what the moderator said at the beginning with the quote on Homer, from Homer on excellence. And I think that this game creates the psychological safety that really allows people to get loose and really think of the future without more or less consequences, because the consequences in a game are really zero. So participants can really experience the freedom to experiment, the freedom to fail. There are really no right or wrong answers and actions to take. They have the freedom to assume different identities, and they also have the freedom of effort. I had a student a couple of weeks ago deciding that they did not want to take any action during the game. And there was a really nice debrief discussion, which is a crucial part of the game afterwards, where she could really reflect on what that meant for her during the game, and if there are any reflections that she could take also for herself. And on the left-hand side, you can see instead what kind of skills students can develop by playing this game. Of course, this is not going to happen after playing it just once, but we saw that this is the kind of skills that students use during the game. So of course, critical thinking and complex problem solving, and negotiations, because there are different actors playing the game, creativity in what kind of actions they want to take, and also emotional intelligence. because this platform really also helps to develop empathy and also to put oneself in the shoes of other stakeholders.
Yeah, Carolina, time check. You have 3 to 4 minutes.
Yes, thank you. So I will go a bit more in details in how it works. So ideally, the game should be played during a workshop of minimum 3 hours. That can be facilitated by us. We have trained game masters in-house. The game can be developed and adapted to many specific topics that can be co-created with ABIS. We can also train other game masters in case the number of students is in the hundreds. And ABIS can also provide the tool, whether in its physical form or digital, and also manage the organization and communication around it. So you might be curious what kind of institutions we played it with. So you can see here a list of our members, mostly academic. The last one is the Junior Enterprises Europe organization that I mentioned before. With whom we actually played it in their winter conference in February. And of course, given the current situation, we needed to revert to a digital version. So this version was entirely developed by ABIS, and we made use of a video conferencing platform and a supporting tool on which we placed the game, the actions, the scenarios, and the resources that the actors can use. So it's entirely virtual, and of course, as you can imagine, it really allows for greater adaptability and also to play with participants from anywhere on the globe. The downside of it was that, of course, for technical reasons, it really increased the burden on the game master, because on top of facilitating the game, you also needed to facilitate the technology. Of course, there are limits to the nonverbal communication and seeing the faces of the participants when they play. And it's also really attention intense. However, despite these struggles, we can see that also in the digital environment, the original reasons why this game was created for, so democratizing foresight and anticipatory governance, it's really getting through also during the online version. So here you see some quotes that we got from the feedback that participants gave us. And to give you a taste, I will just read the first one, which says there are a lot of scenarios possible, and we are the actors in these scenarios, so we need to take care about what we do. And I think this is a very nice learning and feedback to get, because this is precisely what we want to do with this game and what we want to do as ABIS in general, which is to generate an awareness, especially for businesses, that they need to take a more active role in society, that they operate in a wider system. They are not isolated islands in big oceans, but they really have to do with a natural system and communities, and that taking long-term views can drive more sustainable actions.
Carolina, please wrap up in a minute.
Yes.
There you go.
So this is the last slide, and I'm just sharing some information in case anybody wants to learn more about this. We have some free taster sessions coming up on May 7 and June 7, and a full game experience on April 28 during our Knowledge into Action Festival. And you can also see my email address at the bottom of the screen. So this is all I have to share with you. And I will be dropping in the chat, if possible, some research material about this game. I think that we have quite an academic audience, so I think this will be relevant to all of you.
Okay, thank you very much, Carolina. Ozdczan, please take it away.
All right, okay, thank you, Chairman. Well, blended future session is always an interesting one, actually, to not only to participate, but also to watch with all this kind of richness and new ideas coming from different disciplines. So I'm really glad once again that we followed up this session and then launched this kind of second through our conference at the National Research University Art School of Economics. So, I will be following a different approach this time. So I'll give a presentation, but I will actually voice three different approaches to foresight. So this is the kind of a different style than I usually follow in my talk. So I usually present my own research. But anyway, as part of this, I will also talk about one of the works that I was involved in as some sort of new approaches to kind of contribute to this discourse. Because there are so many innovations, developments, and different ideas in foresight. And I was very pleased actually to see that with the beginning of this, you know, the pandemic was very bad, of course, for many people, and we were all affected. But at the same time, it was a great trigger for, you know, an interest, further interest for future studies and foresight. So a lot of different voices, a lot of different approaches, ideas, concepts are arising from all over the place. Some of these are contributing, of course, to the creativity aspect of foresight and futures thinking. The others are contributing to kind of interaction and bringing different stakeholders and how to enable this process, like in this presentation we saw, for example. And some of them are actually enabling us to use some new evidence. So I will try to present like three approaches in foresight, selected from the recent publications in Foresight Journal, and which I thought were noteworthy, actually. Whether they are cutting edge or not, of course, it depends on, you know, who is in the audience. So some of us are familiar with this, but maybe there will be some little innovations. But I think it's a good idea to focus on at some point the new approaches and to keep a record of them to show the progress we make in our field. So I will begin with a publication. So I will actually kind of present the three approaches. And one of them, the first one, is on identifying future trends by podcast mining. So as I said, one of the advancements we make in foresight with a kind of increasing amount of data, increasing amount of, you know, possibilities for processing, collecting and processing this data and visualizing this data, we are building new evidence. And this evidence actually helps us to build some futures. So we are not only like speculating about the futures, and we are always trying to bring some different data and different sources of data. So for example, data from publications, data from patents, data from social media, this have been used frequently. But this approach, for example, analyzing podcasts and mining them, and then using them in a kind of explorative manner for horizon scanning is a new one, at least bringing us the idea that we are not only using textual data, but we are also using, or we have some mechanisms to use data from some voice records. And maybe we will also be able to use some videos and some films or movies, for example, to scan and to see what sort of ideas. And by the way, there were a lot of movies, there have been a lot of movies in the past which have been very inspirational for us to envisage different futures and alternative futures. So that's why I find them very, very useful. This particular work was presented by a set of researchers, the team of researchers mainly from Germany. So from Fraunhofer Center for International Management and Knowledge Economy, as you see. So they were actually trying to, again, bring some respectable podcasts from some reliable sources and then use them for the purpose of some quantitative content analysis, and then extract some interesting themes which would be relevant for us. So here are some of the steps of the process. So it begins with the scoping stage, so definition of the scope and the scanning field. And then for this purpose, actually, they collected some topics which they were interested in. And then with the time horizon of 2030. And then selecting data sources. There are so many podcasts, so many records available for that. So they were choosing the most relevant ones and then reducing this sort of sample in order to make it kind of analyzable and to be more focused. And then after that, there was the results, the presentation of the results in different forms. So if you look at for example, they selected the podcast shows, you can see that they are here mapped based on their affiliation and access. So how broad audience through the bandwidth content, for example, they were testing that, and what were the affiliations, whether this were like a public broadcaster, umbrella organizations, or independent. So this is how they are mapped. And then you can also see some of the examples of results. So for example, BBC Inside Science. So there's a science category which was broadcasted in the UK, BBC Radio 4. And then this is, of course, a scientific kind of a show. And here's more information. And you can see some of the keywords extracted as a result of this process. For example, artificial photosynthesis, carbon capture, microbiomes, microbes, quantum computers, and so on. And also there are some interesting technologies like soft robots, brain-machine interactions, which is, I think, one of the important themes for the future, and also developments on artificial intelligence and other technologies. What would be interesting, for example, add-on on the top of this, because this analysis, as far as I understand, mainly was based on the abstract and the description, title, and the keywords identified based on this content. Some transcription of these conversations could be generated, and some sort of semantic analysis would also be applied to improve this research. And for that purpose, actually, I will now promote our IFORA system, which is bringing a lot of different sources of information again, the intelligent foresight analytics system. So that sort of semantic analysis, for example, by transcribing some of the talks or conversations into text and analyzing them would be a good step forward as a follow-up to this study. And the second one is actually a familiar one. And I picked this up, and this will be detailed by my colleagues Joe Rovitz and in Miles in the next session. So this is also to promote our next session. So when we started the blended futures idea with Raphael and Jean-Paul, and we decided that, okay, we should look out, not only like the foresight field itself, but also should capture some of the areas of arts, design, urban design, big data, and the other algorithmics, for example. And this is representing the urban design aspect of that. So there's a study in here. It is actually developing some tools, Foresight 3.0. Again, it will be detailed in the next session following ours. And then this Foresight 3.0 is applied to strategic urban intelligence. So the urban level is actually very meaningful because it covers most of our lives, urban spaces, and most of socioeconomic activities also take place in urban areas. That is why it's very important, I guess, to embed foresight in cities and urban areas. So this brings us the possibility, for example, looking at the urban areas and cities as organisms, as living organisms, and then a lot of social learning processes, for example, taking place in that. And in order to start changing this process, so we need to actually think this as a system in a holistic manner, and what the synergies between different actors, different factors emerge within that system. And this particular study is applying this into the UK Foresight and Future of Cities program. And then it is looking into the future of cities, so what a future city would look like. And it is bringing us a new approach from linear thinking in earlier foresight activities to co-evolutionary, systemic and synergistic thinking. And by looking at different actors, different factors, their interactions, and in a systemic manner again. So Joe will present, I think, a lot more colorful visualizations in his talk. The process has been built on 4 S's. So the S, actually, each S represents one stage, beginning with the systems perspective, for example. The first one is, for example, asking the question who and what is involved, what are their relations and connections. Then we move on with divergent and exploratory view. What are the drivers of change, trends, tensions, and alternatives? And we're glad that actually Joe is bringing here also the conflicts. So there's not always consensus about the future, but conflicts may also emerge. And this sort of thinking helps us and provokes actually our thinking, what are the conflicts? What are the tensions between those? And synergy and idea mapping stage, helping us to answer questions like what are the possible synergies and opportunities and who could realize them? And then mapping, and then this is again connected to strategies and road mapping. In a recent conversation with Joe, we added some other steps into this process, also starting with S. So I have been promoting 7I approach, but now it seems like we are also working on 7S approach. So this S the new ones are representing scoping, which is probably the beginning of the process. Again, understanding the boundaries of the system, and then it helps us to understand the system, and then we continue with the other scenarios and synergies, and we also integrate the scanning phase to understand the trends, drivers of change, weak signals and wildcards, which may be involved in society, technology, economy, politics, values, environment, etc. So we are looking at this bigger picture and seeing this kind of an ecosystem of different actors and different stakeholders, and they are also engaged in the process as part of Foresight 3.0. And for example, I like this simple process showing how our previous thinking and current thinking is when it comes to, for example, urban policy sectors like housing, for example. Housing and community were considered at the beginning with housing numbers. So how many houses can we provide? So just looking at the supply based on the number perspective. This is very reductionist, of course. Then the more kind of evolutionary process took us to the housing markets, supply and demand issues came into the picture. And then at the very final point, we came to an understanding that we should be focusing on providing livable housing and inclusive communities. So it is not only about the quantity of houses, it is about the quality at the same time. So how can we design all these communities? And the overall purpose is not to produce as many houses as possible or to create some markets with ever increasing prices, but actually creating some communities, inclusive and livable communities for people. So this is, again, much more robust, much more sustainable approach in foresight thinking. And more details will follow in his book. So this is actually available already, Deeper City, so you may want to take a look at it. And the third approach is an important one. It is also bringing a new perspective in our futures thinking. This time it's the kind of methodological proposal for the scenario planning process. So it is actually more like a precocious view. I also contributed to this work myself with two of my colleagues, Yuri and Alexander, from the Higher School of Economics. So we were thinking about developing a more precocious view of the future, because some of the people, some of the practitioners talk about the prediction of the future, but we cannot actually purely predict, especially when it comes to the long-term future. And at the other extreme, we have creative, explorative, and divergent futures. And so we try to kind of see how we can bring these two approaches together, because we think that in planning scenarios, short and long-term horizons should be dealt with differently. Because in short-term time horizons, we can predict at least some of the developments. For example, the speed of economic and technological changes are more foreseeable when it comes to 1 to 3 years or 5 years perspective. But in the long run, there are more drastic changes and bigger uncertainties and more complexity, where we can expect some major socioeconomic and cultural developments. So this is the kind of main distinction between short and long-term time horizons, and why we should think about them differently. And also, when planning scenarios, we should consider external and internal conditions. External conditions are the conditions which are happening in the world, all the events around us, in the big picture. And the internal conditions are the one that we may have some influence. So actually designing the future, managing the future, is about finding a balance between these external and internal conditions. So in this approach, we are actually meeting all these kind of different views, different perspectives in the middle somewhere. So we see that some of this could be forecasted and predicted in the next few years to come. So there's the kind of more forecasting based thinking, but we also have like an explorative long-term time horizon, and which is given us to think about the longer term change. And then we try to see how that kind of future, for example, in the long term, may emerge from the nearer term. So what are the pathways, for example? We use some sort of a backcasting approach. So we bring that kind of long-term time horizon into nearer term by looking at the narratives in every 5 years. For example, in this case, we look into 2035, this is the long term, and we bring that back to 2030 and 2025 and explore the alternative pathways that may lead to those sort of futures. And also,
Ozdchan, time check,
yes,
2 minutes.
2 minutes, good. I'm also about to finish now. So, and the forecasting is actually able to tell us, so what might be happening from now to next 5 years, and what are the alternatives. And in the middle, 2025, we try to see if we can actually somehow connect and somehow fine-tune all these futures, because some of this can be predicted and it will lead us from short to medium term, and some of them is explorative, it brings us from long to medium term. So the medium term becomes an important one to see whether these developments can meet. And then we can actually build a full process, starting from the present to the future, looking at the external conditions and also the internal conditions, and how this can meet at some point so that we can have a complete narrative of the process. So thank you very much. So again, so I represented 3 different perspectives in here and highly recommend this as key readings.
Thank you very much, Ozdchan. So, John, JP, you're next.
Okay. I need control.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that yes, I can control the room. I think that that now you hear me, right?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, perfect. I know that you are going to tell me run, Forrest, run. So I am going to do that. Thank you for the invitation, my dear friend Sherman, Ozdchan too. This is the third edition of our Blended Futures. We have the first at the APF in Collaborate 2020, next at the UNESCO Summit in December. And this is the third time that we are presenting this. So I will show you, I will share my screen, and I will present you the articulation between foresight, science fiction, and speculative design. So you are going to tell me if you are seeing my screen, please. Yes?
Yes, I can see it now.
Okay, perfect. So I'm from Quito, Ecuador. This is a multinational panel. We have 3 continents represented here. So I'm a consultant and a professor in the imagination and materialization of the future. I finished my PhD in February, so I'm not anymore a candidate, fortunately. So during my research, I found some problems on future studies. I was just give some examples. For example, little creativity in the presentation of the scenarios, little impact on innovation, problems on making the future tangible. We don't put more attention on ruptures, breakthroughs, and consequence. There are problems in managing uncertainty and risk. And I think that there is an abuse in the use of desires and scenarios. That's what I found in my research. Also, I found in my research 13 key concepts about future studies. I think if you want to know if a foresight study is a good one, has a good quality, this kind of study has to invent or transform something at the organization. Go beyond forecast, like Ozdchan said before me. Go beyond forecast, strain imagination, analyze consequence. There must be a participatory process. We have to identify latent needs. We have to strengthen the management of risk, uncertainty. We have to identify ruptures. Like Carolina said, the critical thinking, critical attitude, we have to put the right questions. It has to be about ethics, about the ability to make conjectures. Think about the famous book of Bertrand de Jouvenel, L'Art de la Conjecture. And like Carolina said, the freedom to imagine is very important. So I think that we are right now in a new way of anticipating and creating the future. There is a greater use of science fiction and design to imagine and materialize the future. I think that we need to strengthen, to complement traditional ways of constructing the future. And like I said, the final goal of all of us is not just to anticipate the future, but to materialize the future. We have to strengthen, like Carolina said, the strategic conversation, the future's literacy for Real Miller. And I love this quote from Paul Ricoeur: imagination illuminates human capabilities. So we have to use tools that can strengthen imagination. So in my research, I found that there are different things that strengthen science fiction and speculative design. In the case of science fiction, you have more consequence analysis, more risk detection, the no-use of probabilities. I think that we're using in the bad way probabilities, not in a good way. The no-use of experts. So democratize the future. In the case of speculative design, you can materialize the future. You go to participatory process. You can create conjectures. And these two disciplines can strengthen strategic foresight. That's the goal we are looking for. But the first question will be, why using science fiction in future studies? I think that I found 10 reasons. First is a risk-free experiment. We can imagine the end of the world, the end of humanity without any risk. It generates more possibilities, like going to the supermarket, like finding some juice, some jam. You have more possibilities, like in the supermarket. It's a form of problematization. It strengthens conjectures, like I said, from Jouvenel. It's an inspirational phenomenon. You have a lot of companies in the world that use science fiction to make innovations. There is a laboratory of ideas pushed to extreme, because in science fiction you have utopias, dystopias. You have escape lines, breakthroughs. It permits us to prevent, to alert, reinforce ethics, very important now in the future. And one important thing is that people are not paralyzed about science fiction, about dystopias, apocalyptic futures, but it permits make people react. Agency is very important, agency. And at the end, I will say that we can bring some fragments of the future to the present. I remember the book of Nicolas Taleb, The Black Sound, and he said in 2018 that the only way to predict the future was to bring some elements of the future to the present. That's impossible, but with science fiction and with design, we can do that. We can bring some fragments of the present to the future to the present. So I can give you some examples about science fiction. Can we think of alternative society? Of course. I think that the books that we need today at the present time about the pandemic are in the 18th century. News from Nowhere, Looking Backward, Cooperation, No Property, No Money, Collaborative Economy. If we like technologies, maybe the solution are in Alter Carbon, in Cory Doctorow. If we're thinking about a country only with women in the public sector, maybe Gioconda Belli with El País de las Mujeres will be a solution. If we want to prevent, to alert, nothing best that overpopulation with Job Runner. What would happen if the only thing we can eat are human beings, like in Solid Green? What about apocalyptic futures, like in Blade Runner? And if we are thinking about totalitarian systems, maybe V for Vendetta and 1984 will be great examples of that. If we want to use science fiction to inspirational effect, nothing best that Minority Report, the film from Steven Spielberg. But we were thinking about living at the space. Maybe Elysium could be a good possibility about the risk, the threats of living at the space. And the example of Werner von Braun, this German who worked for the NASA after World War II, people say that he was inspired by the book The Woman in the Moon and Metropolis, the famous movie. And right now, the French army are using writers to think about the threats and risks of the future. And what about more possibility like a supermarket? You have Dune for geoengineering. You have terraforming other planets like in Red Mars, Green Mars, Blue Mars, Ray Bradbury. What about if in the future there will be no more humans, but just post-humans? And that would be a great idea, the book of Frederick Poe. And if we are living on virtual reality almost all the time, maybe Other Line or Ready Player One could be a good possibility. And if we want to have some escape lights, maybe more contact for the nature, Pacific Age, maybe more walking, more bicycles, the revolt of the pedestrians. So we have different possibilities about the science fiction to innovate, to improve skills, competence at organizations. But what about coupling strategic foresight and design? That's my second question. When you use design, you can obtain more concrete scenarios. You can generate debates and discussion. You can co-create, and like Karolina said, democratization of the futures. You can use, as in science fiction, the what if question. What if? We can make people discuss, conjecture, like we said about Bertrand de Jouvenel. The process is that we can use make possible to better materialize the future. You have to think that it's not enough to anticipate the future. You can materialize the future. You can create a highly participatory process. And like in science fiction, we are more awareness of risks, of threats about the future. So there are a lot of similarities between science fiction and design. And for example, in my work, I used to do design in order to make people materialize the future. This is the case, for example, at the university in Barranquilla in Colombia. They think about the worst scenario of higher education. And they say, this is what is for us the worst scenario. Education with screens, all virtual. And it's amazing because this is what is happening today, not in 20 years. This is happening now in 2021. For example, in Cali, in a master's degree, we use Black Mirror episodes. I don't know if you know Black Mirror, but they are dystopian, the episodes about the use of new technologies. So they use an episode to innovate, to create a new product that it do not exist, but it would exist in the future. So they took an episode and they make innovation. we create some dystopian cities, like we did in Argentina, in Mendoza. I did it in Ecuador. I did it in Colombia. So people make draws, take pictures. So interesting because we can see the future, we can smell the future, we can touch the future. That's very important right now. We produce some utopian cities too, and people use all the materials that they have in the room. So it's not expensive, it's cheapest because people use what they have in the room. But we can produce also a high fidelity prototypes too, like you can see. But people make drafts. It's very funny, and people like the sessions because people can play. It's a ludic situation, so people like all this experience. We can use also design to create new services, like we did in hotel in Argentina, like we did in Paris with Futurible. What are we doing is to use science fiction and after to use speculative design in order that people can innovate, to create new products, new services. And I use it also in the Army because I'm teaching in an Army academy here in Ecuador. So I asked to people, to the officials, to use a science fiction novel and after to create some design. And they use different types of materials to make designs, like you can see in the picture. And for example, one official with his two daughters, they created TikTok about the future of risks of threats of the Army here in Ecuador. So it was amazing because maybe you can think that these people are too serious, they don't want to play, they are not going to drown. But for them it was interesting because they could work at home with their families, with their wives and children. And the last year also with a friend of mine, with Dario Bolivar, we present some science fiction short novels. I wrote some science fiction novels, or short ones, and then Dario designed for me that kind of novels. And we produced a document that I presented at the World Future Studies Federation in December in the summer, in the summit UNESCO summit, when I present that we can articulate science fiction with design, because I can write some science fiction novels, and then other people can design that kind of novels. So in one sense, we can anticipate the future with science fiction, but in the other way, I can materialize the future with design. And it's more concrete for people. People can see, can touch, can feel the future. That's very important. And I articulate science fiction and speculative design in a process that I present during my PhD research. As you can see right here, I have 4 steps: discover, imagine, design, and act strategically. And I put science fiction in the middle, in the imagine step. So I use some science fiction novel to adapt to the company with which I am working. So for example, in the case of Colombia, I use Fahrenheit 451 from Ray Bradbury, because in that kind of novel, knowledge is forbidden. So it was perfect for imagining the dystopian future of the university in 20 years. And I put this speculative design in the 3rd step in design because I want to materialize the future. I want to see what is inside the minds of the people with whom I am working. So I use design to materialize, to have the possibility to see the future, to think, to touch the future, okay? And at the end, what we are doing is to use science fiction and speculative design like inputs in order to define, to identify the strategy, the future strategy of the company, because at the end, what companies need is a strategy. So obviously we have the strategy at the end. You can find more information in the magazine Foresight with my director, Javier Medina. We published last year this hybrid process for a new era of strategic foresight, when you are going to find in deep more details about the articulation between strategic foresight, science fiction, and speculative design. So if you want to contact, I will be open to questions, to more information. This is my YouTube channel. I am Instagram. I have and we have a community of business transformation too. So I'm open to different questions. Here I am with my V for Vendetta mask, because I love that kind of novel. And I forgot, because I have to mention one novel from Russia, the novel We. What would happen if freedom is forbidden? If the path to going to the happiness is to eliminate freedom. That's a famous novel from Russia from the 20s to 30s. That his name is I suggest to read it. Maybe you know in Russia, but it's a great novel. Thank you a lot, Ozdchan. Thank you a lot, Sherman. I hope that you like the presentation.
Thank you very much, Jean-Paul. You ran fast, actually, right? It was fast but efficient. Thank you very much. Now we can start our discussion, and there are several questions posted in the meeting chat, but I would like to begin with Рафаэль because I think I owe her like several minutes in her presentation. Like perhaps 2 minutes or 3 minutes. But there's a good question here from Lee. Рафаэль, please answer this question. So I've been trying to like simplify the question, but as I read it here, Lee's question is that, when futures and foresight approaches, especially if it's cutting edge and art driven, when it enters the public sector realm, it gets more complex, like in terms of, adaptability. And the question from Yuna here is that, are there trends by which artworks can be used into policy making and strategy development? And another important question here is that what do policymakers consider, to accept, the views of architects and designers in policy?
Well, thank you for this question. And yeah, and I'm glad because I thought I had prepared my presentation for just the amount of time, and I was like, that's not normal that I'm short of time. But yeah, I mean, it's like the use of art to design the future of cities. It's still a very touchy question because and you see, for instance, I was interested in the game that Carolina presented. Very often when politicians or institutional bodies are willing to have collaborative research for the future and citizen-oriented, they never really invite the creative community, like artists, designers are not necessarily there, and they are more like as a civil society at large or the business sector. But the creative, the true the professionally creative community is often a little bit on the side. Or you would have architects that are mobilized, but then it would be very much for the urban shape, not necessarily for the urban life. It would be more like designing new buildings and new infrastructures, but for really what the ecosystem of the city, really the urban life in a broader sense. Artists are invited, but they always remain at the periphery, I think, because also they have a tendency to really point critical issues, and they have a tendency to really not like to be instrumentalized. And so I think it's much more interesting for politicians, if they want to work with artists and creative skills, they'd rather support art-based research project or design research project and let those projects grow and become platforms so that they engage with a broader community rather than use them as an instrument. So it's really this between bottom up and top down. It's more relevant that politicians or public bodies support existing projects that are coming from art places, artists, or even art academies or design academies, to let them go up rather than commission them directly some contribution. So it's really a subtle, or it's really a subtle negotiation about how to collaborate. And then there is some for public bodies. Then there is all kind of like design approach of like the design of public policy. And then in this case, it's more relevant to use designer as a service. Really like work with the team inside so I would say that there is two ways. Either it's really an internal process and the public bodies are working with designers to design internally new public policy, or if they want to collaborate with the creative community, they'd rather support autonomous dynamics and independent places to let them grow. But there is many things to prototype in that sphere, because I think nowadays the artistic community is much more open to those collaboration. I think the society has changed in the last, I would say even in the last 5 years. I see a very different feeling among, and with the COVID crisis, with all the cultural places being closed, you know, many of the cultural institutions are also redefining their role in the city, in the society, and so suddenly becoming a relevant stakeholder to design, to co-design the future of the society and the city. Then it becomes now it becomes more appealing to them than it was 10 years ago, where they would have felt more instrumentalized and not necessarily ready to collaborate in a nice way. And but I think academia is a good space also, like the Paris Galaxy project. I started it as an art project, but it's really when I started to have that collaboration with the Sorbonne University. From there, I was able to really build a full ecosystem of collaboration with other design school, design management masters, art management, architecture school. It became really and each case, it's also very much a question of person. Like, it's really, if there is a good fit with the person, then you can design a very original program, and they work extremely well, because it's like in terms of creativity, it's super powerful. Like, it's when I see the difference between when I do workshop with business or with business students, whether professional or students, compared to what's going on with design and architect and artist. I mean, the level of creativity is really much different, and it doesn't mean that. And I would say working with like very powerful creative minds is also give a chance to make the project more feasible. It's not that it becomes more utopian, because the ideas are more like the more interesting ideas, and in a way, because they are very powerful ideas, you can imagine a business model that would go with it. Like, when I didn't stay on the slide where I was showing how with the art and design student we were designing creative hubs, the third spaces. Some of the places we worked with were really abandoned building, like really very hardcore, very difficult project, and some of the project were like ready to be invested in. Like, really, it's because it's like a I think it's really important to really advocate for a much more collaborative approach with the creative ecosystem of the society, not just the creativity of citizens, but really the creativity of the cultural sector. And I mean, if you have like specific cases, you can reach me out by mail, and I'll be happy to look at that specific case.
Yeah. Yep. Thank you very much, Raphael, for that. Now, my next question is, about, of course, we do have different approaches, and as we've said, trying to explore different ways of, creating more value as far as our end users and stakeholders are concerned. I would like to hear from Carolina, Jean-Paul, and Ozdchan about the approaches that you presented as far as process. The process has been discussed, but I would like to know more about the impact and implication as far as your stakeholders are concerned, in terms of value. What specific or particular type of value does this approaches create as far as your clients or stakeholders and participants are concerned? I'd like to hear first from Carolina, and then Ozdchan and Jean-Paul.
I love this question. Thank you so much. There are a couple of perspectives from which I could approach it. One is more general on the SES, but I will actually use the one because I mentioned that there are different versions of this SES game, so I will stick to our own experience. The tool is so versatile that the use and the value that different stakeholders can take out of it is really impressive. As I mentioned, it has been used with policymakers in order to integrate foresight into policy making, businesses to think about their business models. I mentioned this was used in mobility, for example. In our own case, so we use it in academic settings with students. And I think that what it provides on top of, so we use it mainly in business school. And I think it really provides a leadership development tool that addresses an area that is perhaps not sufficiently addressed through the usual academic curriculum. So it helps students to put together everything that they are learning in the different specific courses on, finance, marketing, strategy, but within a very realistic setting in which they also deal with different stakeholders. So many students go into business schools and then afterwards they realize when they go out that, oh, like I have a business background, but I can actually use my skills in many different type of organizations, and my impact doesn't need to be just in a business. So from our perspective, this is one of the reasons why professors have been reaching out to us to sort of, and this workshop have been often used as a closing workshop for some modules related to business and sustainability, just to put together the knowledge the students gain with the current reality, and also to make them, as we were all mentioning, to put them in the shoes of future stakeholders and to make them take actions based on what they know so far, the skills that they got so far, but also on the kind of dynamics and interaction that might arise with other stakeholders.
Thank you, Carolina. Now for Ozdchan, linked to that question is, there's an increasing interest in data foresight, right? I've been seeing that in Australia specifically, for Sesiro Data 61. And it was great to see, different ways by which you could actually make sense of data and find ways by which data are available, like podcast mining. So what's the outlook there, Ozdchan, as far as, data is concerned?
Sherman, I'll come to that point, but I'll start from a little earlier, because I was very much inspired, actually, in relation to your question, inspired by the phrase Jean-Paul used, feeling the future. So I understand that actually whatever we do right now, for example, with the gaming methodologies that Carolina mentioned, with the data, for example, and searching for new evidence, and what we try to make actually, to make people kind of aware of, the future, and to make them feel the future. These are, of course, very limited efforts because we have 5 senses. And most of our foresight activities have been about talking. So we read and we hear. But how about the others? I mean, do we smell the future? Do we, taste the future? Because all this, for example, will give us some different aspects of the future. We really need to feel it. If we want our stakeholders to act and to do something, they really need to feel the future and the results of their decisions. For example, a child learns, when they touch a kind of hot stove, they will learn actually, what it means burning your hands, so they won't do it again. But with our kind of, I think, limited approaches still for foresight, we are still far from warning people or showing people, the opportunities and threats and learning kind of from the future and feeling the future. These are very limited. So connecting to the data part, we are now working on this from the data perspective. So how we can increase this awareness of the future, how we can make people, to feel the future by looking at, what's going on with the kind of increasing mean temperatures and then, changing climate. Or every day, I mean, we are looking at now the COVID-19 figures and things, but we see that this is still not enough. So our search for making people feel about the future will continue.
Oh, that's an interesting point, like data linked to emotions and feelings. And
Absolutely.
I would like Jean-Paul perhaps to respond to that. And Jean-Paul perhaps might want to close it. We have 2 minutes. Jean-Paul?
Yes, of course. I think that the traditional way of doing foresight is about experts. But right now we have to democratize the future in highly participatory process. And I will talk about 2 examples. Right now, we are beginning an exercise with the university here in Ecuador And I am going to work with not just the university. We're going to work with the stakeholders, with different kinds of stakeholders in order to imagine the future of the university, but in dystopian way, because I use dystopian situation to imagine the future. I make transtopia. We first imagine the worst, and then we imagine the best that we want to obtain in the future. And the second example is from the police. I will work for the police here. And when we have the meeting with them, they think that we are going to work just with the officials, with the policemen. And I say to them, not at all. I am going to work with citizens, with companies, with associations, because it's important that that kind of people help us to imagine the future and materialize the future of the police. So I think that we are in a new area when we have to insert more stakeholders to our discussions to democratize the future, and we have to not just to think that foresight is only about experts. We have to democratize the future.
Thank you very much, Jean-Paul. And this is our session, ladies and gentlemen, Blended Futures. And thank you very much.
Thank you.
And
thank you.
Can I just add a word? Yeah, I just wanted to bounce on Ozdchan also. Just a last word on. I'm sorry can we have 1 more minute? Because I think the horizon, the question of the horizon that you raise, Ozdchan, between the short term and the long term, just if we can have a little bit of a conversation together, because I think in the project I presented, there was a challenge between the near future and the distant futures, and as you say, this is a pivotal. Like there is a moment in the horizon where you really need to systematize, and in that project, the metaphor of the constellation and this kind of fluid matrix ended up being quite efficient to continue from short term to long term by having a canvas that is kind of like there is a canvas, but it's quite fluid. And maybe we can speak about that in the next session also with on urban design. But
sure,
I would have loved to engage in a conversation with you guys on this.
Yeah, time horizon conversation. The time horizon conversation is a very good one, actually. In the example, it was maybe fixed like every 5 years or something like that, but this is very fluid, as you say. It is a transition from predictable to unpredictable, and it may change. Sometimes it's 1 year, sometimes it's 5, sometimes it's 100. So we can see it with the, again, current pandemic. We can understand what's going to happen tomorrow or the day after, what we don't know next year, for example. So that's already long term.
Yeah.
So
yeah, 1 year is long term. Yeah.
Yeah, can be definitely. Yeah.
So do we have to stop now? Yeah.
Yes.
Yes, well, I think there's a next session.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, please stay with us. So the next session will also continue. Being very lively and very interactive.
Yeah. Let's do a Blended Future 3.
Yeah. And Sharon, thank you very much for joining us this evening, your time. So looking forward to talking to you soon again, and everyone, of course. So it was great to have you in this session. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you a lot. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ozdchan.
Thank you.
I'll stay